Morning, y'all. My name's Jaden Kelly. I work for the Texas A&M Forest Service. I am a conservation education program specialist. So basically, I'm the educator and volunteer coordinator out of the W.G. Jones State Forest in Conroe. I also do a lot of education and outreach programs across the greater Houston area. In addition to that, have any of y'all heard of Project Learning Tree? Yeah, it's an environmental education curriculum book that's TEKS aligned. I'm a co-coordinator for PLT for the state of Texas. So if any of y'all after this want to get a PLT training scheduled in your area, let me know. We'll make it happen.
I think we have a QR code for PLT at the end.
Yeah, even if you're not from the Houston area.
Yeah, so there'll be a website you can look at too. I think we had it from last year with the upcoming trainings on there.
Yeah.
And so, hi, I'm Sam Hill. I am a woodland ecologist, also for the Texas A&M Forest Service. I work in our water resources program. So kind of like Jenny before, my focus is water conservation, but I'm looking at it through sustainable forestry practices. So working with people to incorporate the right kind of trees into their properties. I help out with timber harvest inspections, going in and looking at thinnings, clear cuts, and I provide technical assistance throughout 43 counties. So most of my day is driving. It's lots of fun. And like Jaden, I help out with Con Ed stuff, just sharing all about trees and forests and how cool they are. And so it's a really cool opportunity that y'all are here and getting to give that opportunity to your students as well. So today we did our introductions. We're going to go over the forestry criteria that Envirothon has set. And so that way you know what's expected of all your students, especially if they advance to the national level. Last year we revamped some of our study resources. So I'll show you what we have for that. That way you can go back and look at some of the material we've talked about today. We don't have time to go into like a whole forestry course today. So we've put a lot of material there for you to look at your own pace, and then also stuff that your students can look at, fact sheets, PowerPoint presentations. I think I might also even have some Quizlets in there linked that they can go to, things like that. Jaden is going to go over a tree anatomy mini review. And so you're going to get to look at some tree cookies, learn the parts of a tree. I'm going to go over some of our common and economically important forest pests that might pop up in the forestry questions. And then we're also going to go over quickly some tree ID. After lunch, we'll go outside. We're going to practice with the forestry tools that you see up here. And then you're going to get to practice some tree ID at your own pace as well. And we put some stuff on the table. Feel free, you can touch, look through, do whatever you want with any of the material you've got on your tables. And then just a little background about us, because not everyone is familiar with the Texas A&M Forest Service. We've been around for over 100 years. We got started in 1915, originally as the Department of Forestry for Texas. In 2012, we rebranded to Texas A&M Forest Service just to show that we're one of the agencies housed under the university system, but we're a statewide agency. We do a lot of wildfire assistance, as well as just promote sustainable forestry throughout the state. Jaden said he works at the W.G. Jones. We have five
state forests.
Yeah.
And really, y'all are familiar that Texas is primarily privately owned. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our role is providing technical assistance and education opportunities to private landowners and to industry professionals. So different trainings for landowners, inviting them out to our forest to see some of those best management practices, things like that.
Awesome. All righty. And then here's our contact information. We also have the Forest Service homepage. And then that QR code on the right, I think has a lot of really great information on it. It has some tools to help you ID trees, some tools to talk about various tree diseases. It also has some really cool resources for teachers, various story maps that you can go through with your students. One of them was talking about water quality, kind of like Jenny had just hit on. We've got maps in there that show like how many trees are in certain urban centers and what ecosystem services they do. So lots of really cool stuff if you want to go in and work out a lesson with your students on the right. All right. Here's the forestry criteria. So this is from the Envirothon standards. I'm just going to kind of go over them really quickly because I know you can read them. These are also on, I believe, the Texas Envirothon website and the national website for you to look at. But your students are going to need to be able to describe the value of trees in different settings, explain the concepts of tree biology. So we're going to go over the different tissues, how they function in the tree today, talk about cause and effect relationships that affect how trees grow and mature. We're going to look at some tree cookies today that talks about that. They need to be able to identify common Texas trees and common regional trees. So this year, the Texas Envirothon competition's out in East Texas. So expect to see some East Texas trees. later on in the presentation, I have last year's list of recommended species for students to learn. We haven't finalized a 2026 list yet, but the competition was held down in Richmond, Rosenberg area last year. A lot of the species are going to be the same just based on where the competition is in Texas. But we do try to keep some species that all students might be familiar with, knowing that people are coming from all over the state for the competition. Last year, we had some questions where students needed to know a tree on site. And then we also had some questions where they were able to use a field guide, but they had to know certain components of the leaves. So it's not like we're giving them the answer. They need to know how to really compare leaves using those guides. You need to be able to identify common forest pests and diseases. We have a list of those pests and diseases for the students to review. I've got a whole little cheat sheet for them. You need to know basic forest ecology concepts. Some of those concepts you guys already cover throughout the K-12 curriculum, like primary succession, secondary succession, the importance of fire on forested ecosystems, but we have study resources for that as well. Something that might be newer to your students is certain forest management practices. So like, what is the difference between wildfire and prescribed fire? What is forest thinning? What's the benefit for forests? Things like that. They need to be able to then make recommendations, be able to read through a scenario or look at a photo of a forest and be able to kind of make some observations about it. Like, has there been a fire regime? Is there maybe a pest outbreak? You know, what's going on to cause it to look like that? And then they also need to be able to use common forestry tools. And these tools they're not really common in like a classroom setting. So we wanted to make sure you guys had time to practice with them today. And then we've also included videos and written guides on how to use those tools as well.
And we recognize that a lot of these tools, they could be kind of pricey. Mm-hmm. We do have offices all across the state of Texas. We have 50 offices, and a big part of our role is educating the public and mm-hmm. educating students. Mm-hmm. So if you want to invite a forester or an ecologist mm-hmm. from your local office to come out and practice with these tools with y'all, please do so.
Yeah, and we can help connect you guys as mm-hmm. well. There is on our website, there is a directory where you can find someone local, but sometimes we're able to kind of get a hold of people a little easier. So if that's something you're interested in, if you need that support, just let us know. Okay, and then study resources. So we made a couple different large slide decks, 2 of them that I think are really helpful for students because they go into a lot of detail that is not covered in like a public science curriculum, is the tree biology. We go really detailed into all of the layers of the tree. We also talk about how trees are classified taxonomically, which is going to pop up on the test questions when you're comparing different trees. And we'll get these on the website. All right, and so that brings me to tree anatomy. So I'm gonna pass it over to Jaden. Give you that. Just let me know if I need to hold anything up.
We're gonna do a little crash course in tree anatomy. Really basics, we don't have a lot of time here, but we'll start at the bottom. What is the system down below the ground? Roots, yeah. Are there different types of roots? Yeah, you could have tap roots, you could have pretty thick roots, fibrous roots. Which of those roots are the smallest? What? Fibrous, yeah. And which of those roots collect the most water and nutrients? Fibrous, yeah. And where is the majority of the root system of our tree? Is it deep underground? Is it in the top few feet of the soil? Most of it's in the top few feet. Most of the root system is spreading out laterally. Sometimes we got our little crown here, sometimes 3 to 5 times past the canopy crown, but it really depends on the species. The roots have 3 main functions. What are those 3 functions? Yep, pulling in water and nutrients, stabilizing the tree, keeping it there. Last one's a little tough. Storing energy. There's a lot of starches down in the roots. So when our leaves photosynthesize and make glucose, they pull those sugars down through the phloem, and they store those sugars in their root system as starch. And then if the tree goes into a dormant period in the winter, it can pull those sugars back out and feed the tree. All right, and we move up to our trunk. What's the role of the trunk of a tree? Yeah. Vascular flow and stability. And so if we check out our trunk of a tree, we see there's a lot of different parts here. What is our innermost part called? Pith. Pith is the very center of the tree. Yeah, those are those first couple years of growth. Just outside of our pith is our heartwood. And what is our heartwood doing for the tree? Stability. It is dead matter. It is just dead tissue. And all it is providing stability for our tree. It is holding it up strong. Just outside of our heartwood, we have our xylem. And what's the role of our xylem? Yeah, so I always remember xy high, flow low. Xylem is pulling the water and the nutrients up high into the tree. If we go past our xylem, we get our cambium layer. And if you get a branch of a tree, like our little sweet gum right here, and you just kind of scrape away, you'll see that slimy green layer. That's our cambium layer. That's some living tissue right there. And what does our cambium layer do? Yeah, it creates new cells. It creates new xylem cells, new phloem cells, and new cambium cells. It's kind of like the stem cells of the tree. Just outside of that, we have our phloem. Well, remember, xy high, it's bringing water and nutrients up. Flow low, it's bringing the sugars down. And then maybe if our tree has a dormant winter, that phloem is then bringing the sugars back up through the tree. But for most of the year, it's bringing the sugars down, spreading that energy throughout the tree, allowing the tree to function and grow and do its job, and storing it as sugars or as starch in the roots. And then our very outside layers, the outer bark, what's the role of our outer bark? Protection. Protecting the tree from what? Insects, critters, disease, the elements, freezes, fires, kids with pocket knives, your back end of your pickup truck, all those things. Yeah, it is protecting our tree. We keep going up our tree and we get to our canopy. And what's this primary component of our canopy? The star of the show? Branches and leaves. So what are our leaves doing? Photosynthesis. And what is photosynthesis? Yeah, converting solar energy and something else, using that and turning it into glucose. So it's combining sunlight and CO2. It creates glucose, and it has a byproduct of that function, oxygen. Yeah. So our trees are also transpiring. They're also releasing that oxygen back into the air. So on the underside of our leaves, we have these little tiny holes. Y'all know what those little holes are called? They're kind of like little mouths. Yeah, stomata. And they could bring in the CO2 and bring out the oxygen. And that creates a lot of suction in our tubular vascular tissue of our tree. And that's what's pulling up all the water and nutrients. So much so that a full-grown tree, like a full-grown oak, can transpire over 150 gallons of water in a day. So pretty impressive suction there. It's a really high pressure. If any of us were under that pressure, we would be crushed into a little cube. But the fact that those tubes are so small allows them to reach that pressure. Kind of neat. All right. And that's really the basics of our tree. Of course, we know what are the flowers for some trees. Like, what's the role of the flower? Reproduction. Yeah. Reproducing. Some are monocots, some are dicots. And then, of course, it creates new seeds that then get dispersed in various ways to start new growth. So
inside the seed, the embryonic leaves, mono has one embryonic leaf. So when that seed opens up, it's only going to have the one. Grasses are monocots. And then dicots have two embryonic leaves. So like all of our trees here are dicots. They open up with two leaves. Those leaves, like some legumes too, their embryonic leaves look totally different than the mature leaves, but it's just either one or two. But it's one of the important ways we classify trees taxonomically is monocot or dicot. Yep.
Sweet.
And then layers of the tree is also really important looking at tree health. A lot of the tree health issues that we look at are really environmental issues. Too much water, not enough space, too much sunlight on one section of bark, bark damage, things like that. So knowing the layers of the trees, knowing that phloem is carrying sugars down from the leaves, xylem's carrying water up from the roots, that's going to help your students if they're given like a pest problem or a tree health problem written out. If they know the layers of the tree and they know, hey, my tree was damaged along the inner bark where the phloem is, well, it's not going to be able to carry those sugars properly down from the canopy. My tree is going to start declining. So knowing those tissues and the function will help them figure out, kind of work backwards those problems.
Yeah. So some of the Japanese beetles are after the sugar.
A lot of the beetles that bore in, yeah, they're looking for carbohydrates and sugars that are stored in that phloem layer. So the issue then is they end up eating a ring around the layer and basically choking off the tree, girdling it.
The tree.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
We had a giant pine tree get struck by lightning, and it split the bark in kind of like a spiral.
Yes.
Why does it?
So the trees, I think it has to do with the water conductivity. Well,
if
it's going through, it's going through the tissue. I think a lot of times it just depends on the structure of the bark. Like some bark is very scaly, so it's going to follow paths of least resistance and split that way. But yeah, basically when you end up with that lightning damage, the outer bark peels off, so then it's prone to pests. So like that would be a great field question for us. Hey, the tree got hit by lightning, but it's still alive, but it's, beetles are going to get into it, can't transport nutrients if it's fast. Yeah.
And y'all will see those like big old oaks that have a massive hole in the side. The inside's completely rotted out. The heartwood's out. And they're still standing. It's those outer layers that xylem, phloem, and cambium, that's the living portion, just that thin little strip along the edge of our tree. That's the only part that's actually alive. So it has just lost all that structural support. So if we get a big windstorm or a hurricane coming in, then we might lose that tree. But still live and thriving. Oh, I got this. An important thing we focus on in the forestry section is dendrochronology, which is tree rings. Yeah, using trees to study the history of the area that tree grew in and the time that tree was growing. So we could learn a lot by looking at a cross section of our tree. One of the most common ways we use dendrochronology is determining the tree's age. How do we determine that? Count the number of rings. And so every year our tree grows when we are in our temperate zone that we're in. It gets spring wood and summer wood. Spring wood is kind of spring and summertime where it's getting a lot of water, sunlight, nutrients. It's able to grow rapidly and we get this light color ring. And then if it goes into a dormant stage during the winter, you'll see that thinner dark ring where it's not getting as much of those resources. So it has that dark layer of growth.
Sometimes on trees, the gradient between that early spring growth and the later darker growth, sometimes it has a gradient, so you can't really find distinct, like a layer of separation. It's not like it hits August and the tree's like, oh, I'm putting on my late wood growth now. I'm going to grow differently. But on a lot of your tree cookies, if you look at them, you'll kind of notice that there are still a distinct band. So like for me, it's easier to see the dark bands. So even though our tree, if you want to get like really technical, it's putting on 2 rings of growth, a lighter color and darker color, but you just need to count 1 color out. Yeah. So a lot of times when we do like activities with kids, they think, oh, I need to double my amount of rings. You don't, because it's not really 2 separate rings. It's just a gradient showing the change.
One thing that's kind of neat is if you go down to the equator of the earth, they don't have that seasonality. So if you cut a tree, a lot of times it's just like 1 solid color, where you'll still see like kind of the vascular tubes in there, but you don't see those distinct rings.
And not all trees have rings. Palm trees aren't true trees. They're monocots. They don't have those growth rings. Some trees put on false growth rings. So like live oaks are kind of notorious for doing that. It makes them very hard to date. And then some trees like eastern red cedars, they just don't have really clear rings. It's just kind of like all 1 color. So we have other ways to determine how old trees are too, basically just going into like a lab process and dating them. And then one other way, if you don't have like a cut down tree, I want to talk about increment borer, and you can just pass that around.
We'll use an increment borer, and we have a few here today. I don't know if we'll bore one of y'all's trees. We'll see if y'all let us. But basically, we're boring into a tree. We're using basically a screwdriver with a hole in the middle to drill into it. And we'll use a little sheath to pull out a core from the tree. That way we could still see all its rings, still see the environmental conditions it grew in, but we don't have to completely cut down the tree. Yep. So Sam's got one right there.
It looks like this. It's kind of like I think about it like a big wine cork puller. Basically, this drill piece slides into this, and we're just twisting like a T-post through the tree and then pulling out just a little layer.
It should not damage the tree if the tree is healthy.
If the tree is healthy. Yeah.
Right.
And I, like, a lot of times landowners will ask me how old the tree is. I don't typically jump to taking an increment sample because I don't want a landowner to come back and say, hey, you damaged my tree and now it's got beetles or a fungus because I didn't clean and my tool or whatever. But trees should be able to compartmentalize. They don't, like our wounds eventually seal up. We can't see them anymore. They kind of like only can scar. So they just close off around that wound. So a healthy tree can compartmentalize the wound. If a tree is stressed out, there's drought, there's too much water, it's already diseased, then it doesn't. And then you get those insect pests. So, yeah. And compartmentalization is a good concept for your students to know. That is in our study resources. That's how trees heal, is compartmentalization.
These tree cookies, these tree rings, they teach us a lot more than just the age of the tree. What else can we determine by looking at a cross-section of a tree cookie? Seasons, droughts, weather conditions. So how could we determine if a drought's occurred?
Really small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very thin, tightly packed rings. What else could thin, tightly packed rings show us?
Less sunlight?
Less sunlight, yeah. So competition with their neighbors. If they're overcrowded, they're getting overshadowed. Maybe they'll have those thin, tightly packed rings as well. It could be a sign of drought, things like that. What about this one? It might be hard for y'all to see, but we see on one side of the pith, they are really tightly packed together. On the other side, it's pretty larger rings. It's growing kind of more so out in that direction. What might cause that? Seeking sunlight, gravity, yeah. So maybe they are competing on this side, so they are seeking the sunlight on their other side. What about scars? What do these scars show us? Yeah, different disturbances that have occurred in their ecosystem. So this could be a sign of fire, could also be a sign of some sort of like mechanical damage, a deer rubbing on it, all sorts of things. Yeah. You have anything to add, Sam?
You want to go through some of the scenarios and then
let's do
we're
it.
good on tree cookies.
All right.
Oh, this was a good one.
Oh, yeah.
What do y'all think
in the world
are?
is going on here, y'all?
Multiple trees growing together?
Could be. Sometimes, yeah. So sometimes you can see a tree fuse into two, or in this case specifically, probably branches that broke and got basically the tree just kept growing around them.
Grew around them.
Same for that one.
Yep. You see those branches. We see those very wide rings rapidly growing, and then it gets thinner around the outside. Maybe a drought's occurring. Maybe they're overcrowded for space. What about this? Fire, good guess.
Well, not fire.
Disease, yeah. So fungus. We see some blue fungus coming in here, and likely it was a beetle that brought that fungus in.
Yeah, one of the forest pests that we'll talk about is an Ips beetle. And there's actually several different tree pests that carry fungus this way, but basically the adults have fungus on their bodies. And so when they go into a tree, fungus rubs off. Some of the insects use fungus as a food source for their larvae. Others, it's just kind of passive. The fungus is just now on the tree. That's part of its reproductive cycle. But you'll end up with that blue stain throughout the wood. Sometimes you can still use that wood for certain products, but a lot of timber harvesters don't want to have a stained wood, even though it's just cosmetic. It just doesn't look like good wood.
If y'all go out to a big mill, you'll see that they have the giant log piles and they have sprinklers constantly running on them, and that's to prevent this fungus from growing. They've gotten pretty sustainable at those mills too. They'll put the wood through like an oven, a kiln, and it'll pull all that moisture out of it, and that moisture, that water they collect from it, is what they then spray on those piles.
I didn't know that.
So
That's cool.
Yeah, they've got some pretty cool little closed loop systems in there. Y'all notice how the heartwood has this darker color forming? What is that stuff? Yeah, sap. It's resin. They're putting a lot of resin in the heartwood. You'll see this with our red cedars like we got in the back there. And how does that adaptation help our trees survive? It's thicker. It's protection from some of these pests. It's helping preventing that wood from breaking down, whether from the elements or from fungus, disease. That's why for the red cedar, like we have back there, we use that to make fence posts and things like that. Since it's so durable, it'll last longer in the elements.
All right, and that's my cue to talk about forest pests. So I split the forest pests up into kind of two big sections. The first one, so I've got mostly insect pests on the first slide, and then basically everything else. So some fungal pests, some bacterial, and then some wildlife. It was really hard to make a list of the forest health issues, like narrow it down to something for students, so they're not having to go get a forestry degree for this competition. So I asked a couple different of our forest health staff and tried to narrow it down as much as we can. So this is the narrowed down list. These are the insect pests. My biggest tip for your students, a lot of the insects have similar symptoms, but different hosts. So figuring out the host, a lot of them are very host specific. They're only going to attack one type of tree. Emerald ash borer only attacks ash trees. It doesn't like pine trees. So even if you're looking at maybe emerald ash borer and southern pine beetle, yeah, they both have these galleries, but they're on completely different hosts. That's just one of the really quick ways that's going to help your students figure out what the issue is.
What's a gallery, Sam?
Oh, okay, so gallery, and we're talking kind of like about the blue stain fungus. So some insect pests bore into trees, especially in like our pine trees. These are economically important insects, our bark borers. The adults deposit their larvae under that bark layer. And then sometimes they're either creating like a little nuptial changer where the adults are mating and then depositing their eggs. And then larvae basically spread out and chew their way through that phloem layer. That's their food source. And so it can spread disease like the fungus, or if the infestation is severe enough, it can girdle that tree because it's basically cutting off the phloem layer. And if it's super severe, it can go into your cambium layer. Your tree can't make new tissue anymore in that area. Remember, what does the phloem do for a tree? Bring sugars down. Yeah, or during the winter, it can help bring sugars up. So it's basically cutting off the sugar transport system for the tree.
Yeah, so we could see their galleries in some of those photos, the little tunnels they're forming.
Yeah, these three, these are all different galleries here, and you'll notice, so some of our bark boring beetles, like these are both pine beetles, southern pine beetle and Ips beetle, but one of the ways we can differentiate them, even though they're on the same species, is by the shape of their galleries. So our Ips beetles have I, Y, H kind of galleries. If you were to peel off some of that outer bark, a lot of times it'll just kind of fall off or peel off really easily. If you have a bad infestation, you'll be able to see the larval galleries and even the little nuptial chamber where the adults mated in that tree. And then some things you'll also see is on the outside of bark, if you have a boring beetle, is a little hole. Some of these, like Ips, bark beetles, they're kind of like a natural pest in the environment. They're there to help break down old dying trees. But when you have like a really bad infestation of one of these, then it can kill your young trees. You'll see in bark boring beetles, a lot of times, Jaden was talking about the sap, the resin, helping to protect against pests. They'll also try to actively push out those bark boring beetles. And so what you'll end up seeing on the ground a lot of times is like some sawdust. You'll also see sap pitch tubes coming out and frass. Does anyone know what frass is? It's bug poop. It's basically the larvae they're eating and they're pooping and they're moving through the tree as they're pushed out. That the wood chips and the frass is what you see coming out of the tree. So that's another indicator. Twig girdlers. Girdling is basically just cutting off one of those tree layers. They're less discriminate, basically any hardwood species. So like your oaks, sycamores, sweet gums, things that aren't pines, aren't conifers. They basically are just breaking off twigs. And then in the Houston area, these you might have seen are those forest tent caterpillars that defoliate trees. So you'll see them on the bark in big patches, but you'll also see like webbing in trees. It's not always like a death sentence because trees are producing leaves either all the time or annually. But if it's really bad, then it's an issue. But it's usually cosmetic. And then I'm going to stop there so we can talk about forest pests. And then after that, we'll be good for the field sessions. This information in this format is going to be available to you online. So just wrapping up, so we were talking about insect pests of hardwood and softwood pine species on the past slide. So this slide here is basically our non-insect forest health issue. And again, this was a super, super, super narrowed down list, but I tried to pick a range of issues that you would find across the state, range of trees. Some of these are look-alike forest health issues, which makes some really good test questions. And then some of them I just think are really cool. So first one, not cool, is oak wilt. This is a pathogen that is really prevalent in central Texas. A lot of our foresters, that's one of the primary issues that they deal with. So it's got its host species in the name. It affects oak trees, especially red oaks. It seems to be most detrimental. But the big thing to look for is this chlorotic leaf. So chlorosis, basically the green pigment is lacking in the leaf. You'll end up seeing some yellow veining along the leaf. That's one of your telltale signs. And there might also be like a fungal mat on the tree. But again, this is mostly out in central Texas. So like if I had a test question that was talking about a property and I really hit home that, hey, the property's here in like Harris County or Galveston County, that might be one of the triggers for your students to realize maybe it's not oak wilt that I'm dealing with, because that is pretty regional. Same when we went back and looked at like emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer in Texas is primarily around the DFW area. So if I had someone reach out to me and say, hey, my ash tree's dying, I live in Tarrant County, that might be kind of one of the hints that, hey, this might be what you're looking at. So I try to find little triggers in scenarios to help me figure out what things are. Another pathogen to look at is brown spot needle blight. This one's nice because the symptom is in the name. It's a brown spot on a pine needle. So it typically has this little yellow halo, but the leaf ends up dying. Tree can't photosynthesize anymore. It could be a multi-year process. A lot of forest health issues are multi-year. It's not like the tree gets an infestation and it dies that year. Sometimes it can if infestations are really bad. But a lot of tree illnesses take time to appear, and that's what makes them tricky to identify. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it the oak wilt, though, that can kill the tree?
It can kill very fast.
Very fast.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and it can spread very fast, too. One of the issues with oak wilt, so oak trees intermingle their roots, and it is an adaptation to help them survive. They can share nutrients, they can share water resources. Unfortunately, it also means they share disease. So knowing the transfer methods of the pathogens is one that I would work with on my students. So like for oak wilt, root transmission is a big one. That's why the care that we do for oak wilt is trenching around the roots. We're basically cutting off those root connections. Let's see here, hypoxylon canker. This is in this area of Texas. You'll see it on hardwood trees. It's basically like a darkish or a gray patch. And it is basically does the same thing. It's affecting that inner layer of the tree, so it can't transport nutrients. You'll see different mushrooms coming off of trees. Mushrooms typically they're breaking down dead organic material. So depending on where you see a mushroom in a tree can tell you if that tree is actively dying. If you see like a shelf fungus at the base of a tree, typically that means that there is some decay either in the roots and that fruiting structure is coming up through the ground, or the actual inner part of the tree itself might be decaying. Oak galls are super cool. Basically, there's these like tiny little wasps and mites that lay their eggs on tissues of trees. And galls can form on other species too, but it's basically just like a weird growth. So the tree will try to build tissues around the invader, and they end up looking like little berries, or sometimes they're like little puffballs. Sometimes they're just like little cocoons, but basically there's like a little insect in there. And you can just go up to an oak tree and find them. Usually they don't hurt the oak tree at all, but we'll get like questions about it from homeowners. So it's a forest health issue that might not be detrimental, but you'll get asked about it. And then just different wounds on trees. So we talked about boring insects. You can have little holes in trees from other wildlife as well. So woodpeckers are drilling into the trees to get at the insects. And then sap suckers are doing the same, but they're typically trying to get the sugary sap in the tree. And sap suckers differ from woodpeckers in that sap suckers end up making these little lines of holes. And so that's I think last year we even had maybe a picture of these little holes in the tree, and it was sap sucker damage. When you have a woodpecker feeding on a tree, typically it means that there's an insect in that tree, which is natural to have insects on trees. It can also mean if there's a lot of woodpecker activity that you have a lot of insects, meaning infestation, or that the tree is dying. So like if there was a test question that said property manager has noticed increased woodpecker activity, that's one of your triggers to think, okay, what are the woodpeckers after? They're after insects. Why are there more insects in the forest now? And then that brings us to tree ID. So this was the 2025 tree list. So this was the list that students were expected to know by sight out in the field. We picked a mix of hardwoods and conifers. I think because the competition is going to be in East Texas, there will probably be more, I say more, like 1 or 2 more pines. Like on here, we had loblolly, slash pine, shortleaf might be on there as well. If we update that list, working with our foresters in the Eastern region, we will make sure that that is updated on the Envirothon website and y'all are made aware. But this is a good list to, even if this isn't the full list, at least get students practicing with leaf ID. Well, all sorts of tree ID, but leaf especially. We picked some trees that kind of look similar at different stages in their life. And that's going to really challenge your students. Do they actually know, other than just leaf, can they look at bark? Can they look at habitat? Things like that. Some resources. Field guides are really helpful. We have a couple different field guides on your tables just to show you the formatting. Some field guides function as a dichotomous key. Other field guides are just like a short little fold out. And some of them that I use day to day are very detailed, but you have to know what you're already looking at. I like having a variety just so I can kind of compare pictures. The best way to get good at tree ID is to just practice. See the trees in person. iNaturalist and Seek, which is one of its partner apps, are really good for practicing. But it's still nice to have a book or an online resource to double check with you. Leaf ID is not the only way to ID a tree. And sometimes it's not the way to ID a tree. Sometimes your tree doesn't have leaves, or like I said, there might be a look-alike. So have students start looking at bark. Have students start looking at the branch unions. Are they opposite? Are they alternate? Talk about what those terms mean. I might go out into the field and not know what a tree is, but if I know what to look for on the tree, and then I can go in and I can look at a book, I can figure out what that tree is. But if I don't even know the difference between alternate branches and opposite, I'm stuck. So all of these terms are in that tree biology slide deck. It walks you through it. Big things we look at are, like I said, branching. How are the branches arranged? What does the leaf look like, especially the edge, the veins of the leaf? The underside of the leaf is often different. Sometimes like it's fuzzy, it might have little hairs on it. Sometimes it's really smooth or it's scratchy. So just get your students kind of looking at the whole tree when they're doing their tree ID. And then I even print out the little quick guides that are on your table. Those are one of the resources we pulled at Well. I keep in my little notebook with me when I'm out in the field. I actually have those in like a small copy. So sometimes I can go back and remember like, hey, this leaf margin's really weird. What was the term for that? And I can find it. So feel free to like bring something like that out when you're practicing with your students. It'll be really helpful. Do we want to go over what the tools are first and then go outside?
Yeah. So some of the main tools we'll be using for the competition, one of them is diameter tape. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's measuring tape used to take the diameter of a tree. There's some different measurements that are really important to forestry. One of them is the DBH. It's diameter at breast height. It's the spot on the tree where we are measuring its diameter. And that spot is 4.5 feet off the ground. So something that's really important for you and your students to know is where on your body is that 4.5 foot mark. So when we get the chance and we go outside, one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to step on our measuring stick. We're going to hold this up and look for that 4.5 foot mark. I know mine lines up with just the bottom of my collar right here. So that DBH, diameter at breast height, is where we are taking our diameter measurement. To get the diameter of the tree, which is the length across it, so diameter from one side to the other, we are going to use our D-tape to wrap it around and get the circumference.
I'm going to lift it so you can.
Yeah, sure. So we'll actually do it. Yeah, so we'll wrap it around. We'll get the circumference.
And I think it's got it flipped on diameter already too.
So one side, it's normal inches. The other side is the diameter. Does anyone know how to get the diameter of a circle in math?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So,
I was just wondering if we were gonna do that in our heads.
no.
Foresters make it easy. We got to cheat on our tools.
The tape does the equation for y'all. So you just wrap it around. We see it is right at 16 inches. We have a 16-inch diameter for this tree.
So if you didn't have a like at your school, if you just had plain measuring tape to find diameter, you take the circumference all the way around, divide by pi, 3.14, and that tells you your cross section width. Foresters don't like doing math out in the field, so we cheat. So on the other side of our tape, it already has it calibrated and converted for us.
Yeah. And this is something you can do by yourself in the field. You're taking the little, what do you call that? Nail, stab it into the side of the tree, and you could walk around it. You want to make sure you keep it level. You don't want any sort of angles in there. Another tool we use to get the diameter is the Biltmore stick. It's like a long ruler. We'll check these out outside.
I'll grab one for you.
To take that measurement, we'll go over that here in a little bit. It's basically you're holding the stick out 25 inches from your eye, which is kind of hard because 25 inches for me is the entire length of my arm. So I feel like, I guess like foresters used to be massive or something because you're holding your stick out. And what's really nice about your Biltmore sticks is if you forget how to use it, it tells you what to do on the stick. So if y'all's kids say, oh God, how do I use this? Read this sentence right here. It says, hold the stick 25 inches from eye against the tree at height of 4.5 feet. Read average volume in board feet. So you hold it out, you close one eye, you line this edge up with the side of the tree, and you see where the other side falls on this ruler up top. Easy peasy.
One thing I want to point out real quick. So some of our forestry tools are made specifically for timber cruising, which is when foresters go out and assess basically how much timber wood there is, how much of it is merchantable, how much can be sold, things like that. That has to happen pretty quickly and just kind of using eye measurements. So like the Biltmore stick, you're using an eye measurement. We've got it set a certain distance away. We're figuring out roughly how big that tree is. If I was measuring for like a tree registry, I would use a diameter tape instead because it's going to give me a more accurate measurement. So it's tools finding the same thing, but just for different contexts. If I'm using a Biltmore stick, I can hop out of my truck real quick, find out my height and my width versus having to set up the diameter tape.
You could also use the Biltmore stick to determine the tree height. One very important measurement in forestry is a chain length. It's just a unit of measurement. It's 66 feet. One chain is 66 feet. So one thing we're going to do when we get out there first is figure out how many paces each of us need to take to get to one chain length. So we're going to measure our paces walking 66 feet. We go out to that 66-foot distance and we hold our stick up sideways and we read the instructions: stand 66 feet from tree, plumb stick 25 inches from eye, line up end of stick with stump height, and read the number in 16-foot log increments.
So if your aquatics person ends up being your tree person for the event, they just need to read the tool and it'll tell them how to use it.
Yep. So pretty easy peasy. Another way to get the height is using our clinometer here. Yeah, right. It's a fun little tool. There's two different readings in here. There's the percentage measurement. Basically, what you're doing is you are looking at the number shown at the top of the tree when you look through here, and you're subtracting what you see at the base. So you look up at the top, maybe it says 75. You look down at the base, it says 5. And so you'll do 75 minus 5. And the percentage is basically how many feet away from the tree you are. So I know these are a lot of words. We'll practice it outside.
And it's in the slides with videos. There's multiple ways.
So we'll use the percentage method, and we'll also use the topographic method, which is always 66 feet from the tree, a chain length from the tree.
And again, they have different benefits. So like if I, for instance, this past week, I was measuring a tree in a heavily wooded area. Usually when I like to take height, I stand either 100 or 50 feet away just because it makes my math really easy. If I stand 50 feet away from the tree out in the woods, I can't see it anymore. So that kind of gives you flexibility. You can scoot up closer. You just have to convert. If I had 66 feet, like if I was looking at merchantable timber, I can do it that way. The big thing with the clinometers, and most of them tell you, because when you look through the eyepiece, you'll see it when we get out there. Imagine like an old school thermometer, line going up and then units on each side. Kind of like a thermometer might have Celsius and Fahrenheit. The clinometers are going to have the topo units, and then they're going to have the percent unit.
Yep.
And if you don't know which one you're looking at, your units are going to get flipped. Most of them will say percent on right, topo left,
Right.
something
And
like
you
that.
should see the symbol for percent on there too.
It should be there.
Yeah. All right. So let's go try
I
it
think
out.
that's it. Yeah. Okay.